saving the world from OmniMan's son!
Throughout the entire multiverse, there are countless evil versions of Invincible, and only in the main universe can Mark be called a hero. But is that really the case?
I'm OmniMan's son. You have no idea what I'm capable
of. As you know from the previous video, most versions of Invincible become killers and psychopaths, which positively emphasizes the original Mark. But what if Angstrom Levy was right and Invincible and actually a hero?
Are you sure about that?
He's a killer, a monster. From an early age, Mark waited for his own powers to manifest, devouring comics about superheroes and watching his own father's exploits, imagining being a superhero not as a curse, but as a gift of fate. While his peers lived in dysfunctional families, hating their own powers, Mark lived in a complete and loving family, creating ideal conditions for him, where the hero has everything and the villain has nothing. After waiting for many years, one day Mark's abilities manifested the ones he dreamed about his entire life, only imagining how he would save people and help the weak, becoming that ideal he dreamed of. But the very first clash with a street villain showed reality. Mark was too strong. He didn't even have to make much effort to defeat his opponent. Here began the first cracks in his ideals. Excessive strength made petty crimes boring and lacking challenge, which in the long term turned helping people into ordinary routine. And at the same time, his father constantly reminded Mark of his belonging to the Viltrum, emphasizing the need to think bigger and not get distracted by people's small problems. You're a Viltrum, you drove away alien invaders, prevented an asteroid from falling. This fuss is beneath you. At first Mark ignored this his childhood, as he thought, was lived conscientiously, but each time he encountered only failures. Saved people weren't always grateful. Help turned into pain, and heroism into disappointment. But one moment changed everything. Thousands killed, even more wounded, a destroyed metropolis. And all this was the fault of Mark and his father, who decided to teach his son a real lesson. The responsibility for all humanity fell on Mark's shoulders, because if he doesn't cope, then no one else can. Although Mark learned the bitter experience of heroism, he simply cannot betray his ideals, allowing his father to doom his home to destruction. After all his loved ones and friends are here, whom he cannot simply betray, leaving everything to chance, hoping that the Viltrum will spare people. And thanks to Mark's resilience and persistence, his father retreated. But this isn't an act of heroism, it's survival. Mark doesn't fight like a classic superhero, full of confidence in his rightness and strength. No, he clings to life, to the remnants of those ideals that crack under the onslaught of his father's might. But he doesn't just beat his son, he shatters his illusions. The lives of these little people are worth nothing. Next to us, they're monkeys. But Mark continues his resistance. And not because he sees himself as the savior of the world, but because he cannot allow himself to lose Debbie and his friends. He doesn't think about billions of abstract people. He remembers his mother, whom Nolan calls a pet. And this wounds deeper than physical blows. Mark idealized his father from childhood, seeing in him the embodiment of a superhero from comics. Savior, protector, moral compass. But the truth is extremely painful to imagine that you'll become like your father, the worst nightmare. In this battle, as in other global battles, Mark is undoubtedly fighting for all people on the planet. But mostly, he's fighting only for his circle, because without them he's nobody. Alternative versions only emphasize this. Without family, Mark becomes a psychopath and killer, because his heroism is fragile. It's built not on ethics, but on emotions. Every time someone threatens Mark's family, he loses control, trying with all his might to protect his loved ones. But at the same time, he doesn't look back at the destruction he himself creates. After Mark's battle with his father, for a long time, the deaths of ordinary people didn't let him live peacefully. After all, everything around reminded him of that day. He was tormented by pangs of conscience for all the dead, and that the guilt for what happened also lies with him. He vowed not to become like his father. However, The older he became, the more he resembled him. Since then, Mark's attitude toward people's deaths has changed significantly. He still tries to save as many people as possible, but now he understands that there will be casualties. If faced with a choice between people close to him and strangers, he will always choose the first option. Throughout the entire show and comic, Mark grows not only as a character, but as a person, and his apotheosis is Cecil Stedman. In fact, these two characters are united by much more than might appear at first glance. In his youth, Cecil was an idealist, believing in a world where there's only good and evil, and every life is sacred. He didn't believe in second chances for criminals, believing they should rot forever behind bars or be dead. I don't work with killers. However, 3 years in prison for supervillains changed him greatly, turning the idealist into a pragmatist who, despite losses, will stop a threat to all humanity. Mark's path is somewhat different. He makes mistakes, many mistakes. Mark constantly tries to do the right thing. At first, he believed that the only outcome for villains would be punishment. Prison, after all, because they broke the law and must pay for it. But with the appearance of his younger brother with a cold, pragmatic view of the world, Mark faces a new reality. Oliver, unburdened by human ideals, teaches Mark that sometimes killing isn't evil, but necessity. This makes Mark think and reconsider his morality. From now on, if an opponent is strong and poses a threat to all humanity, Mark is capable of crossing the line. In many ways, this lesson allowed him to look at Cecil's work with criminals from a different angle. If before Mark didn't understand how Cecil could work with monsters like Sinclair and the new Darkwing, now he realizes that there's no point in keeping criminals in eternal confinement if you can at least try to re-educate them, putting them on the right path. Drawing from Cecil's actions, Mark himself begins to rehabilitate some villains, and at first he even succeeds. He prevents the appearance of a new villain by helping a genius obtain new connections and work. He settled down instead of robberies using his own technologies. He helps a crazed queen who, out of desperation, was ready to destroy all of Earth, because without energy her home planet will die. On the wave of such uplift, Mark sincerely believes that he'll manage to rehabilitate and use for good Dinosaurus, one of the most brilliant villains who killed tens of thousands, but by his actions saved millions. Although his act wasn't ethical, Mark went against all rules, sincerely believing in a second chance and his abilities. In Dinosaurus, Mark saw only a reflection of his pragmatism. The villain saved millions, though thousands had to be sacrificed, but in attempts to change the world for the better, Mark suffered another failure. In the end, no matter how hard Mark tries to become a true hero, he only makes things worse. His one wrong action negates all attempts to become better. His actions aren't a firm desire to help, but adaptation to difficult circumstances. When a person wants to do the right thing but is forced to go against their own values, this leads to feelings of guilt and shame. Mark begins his adventure as a dreamer, where good is based on general rules of justice, but difficult experiences create discord in his thoughts. His ideals struggle with real life, where gradually Mark begins to justify sacrifices for the common good. However, his connection to family makes this shift incomplete. He will never become a cold strategist like Cecil. He will remain a hot-tempered anti-hero whose actions lead to irreversible consequences. The closest character in spirit can be called Spider-Man. Their first steps with Invincible are similar in many ways, but fundamentally different in essence. There are many versions of Spider-Man. Some help villains recover, some lock villains and bandits behind bars, and some. But whatever spider we take, they're all united by one thing. If you can help people in any way, it's your moral duty to do so. Every Spider-Man had their key event. Like Mark, this event broke them emotionally. But in the case of Peter, Uncle Ben's death was his fault. Mark only became a victim of circumstances from which he didn't learn a lesson about losing a loved one to the same degree as Peter. His father is alive, but at the same time is somewhere unknown. Mark learned the bitter experience of betrayal, and Peter of loss due to his own selfishness. and so he vowed to help people at all costs. Peter Parker is a strong character, but he always remains vulnerable, empathetic, and connected to ordinary people. His lesson from Uncle Ben's death is deep guilt that forms an unbreakable morality, not allowing him to pass by people in need of help. Peter saves the world not only from global threats, but from petty crimes. He doesn't kill his opponents, even if the villain caused him incredible pain, because he believes in redemption and people's ability to change. This makes him a hero. His strength is a tool for protecting the weak, not for destruction. Peter balances the life of a hero with ordinary work, friends, and family. He doesn't alienate himself from the world. On the contrary, he's a friendly neighbor who remembers how valuable each life is. Mark Grayson, on the other hand, his strength makes him detached from humanity. His lesson is his father's betrayal. Mark isn't guilty of Nolan's actions. He's a victim. This leads to anger and fear, not self-condemnation. He doesn't draw the lesson, "My mistake cost a life," but rather, "The world is cruel, and I must protect my family." This makes his morality egocentric. Mark saves Earth not out of love for every person, but because his loved ones are here. When minor threats arise, he completely ignores them, shifting these problems to other heroes. After all, from his own experience, he learned that you shouldn't blindly trust everyone. But in the case of global threats, Mark cannot remain on the sidelines, and first of all, he thinks about protecting his own family and only then about other people. Unlike Peter, Mark can without any qualms finish off an opponent once and for all if he considers them dangerous enough. Invincible shows by his example that no matter how noble your plans are at the beginning, there will always be something that breaks you from within, a reality that turns dreams into ruins, and a hero into a shadow of himself. Comment down your thoughts and subscribe for more Invincible breakdowns, and I'll see you in the next one.